10th Infantry Regiment, Company F.
128th?
No, 28. 28. That was a Pennsylvania National Guard outfit. Okay.
Even though you had your...
Pennsylvania National Guard, and they had been in several combat areas, and been in several fights before, but I think the Hurtgen Force was the big one, first one they got in. And we were one of the about 7 different divisions that they threw into Hurtgen Force in Belgium and on the German-Belgian border to try to break through the Siegfried line, the pillboxes, all that sort of thing. And we were one of those divisions, and we got shot up just like the other ones had been, and they had them in there 2 or 3 weeks, and they were so decimated that they would pull them out and send in a whole new other division. And there were about 7 divisions involved like that. I didn't find this out until I got back and got a book about Hurtgen Force. And the government didn't want that known because it showed that the American Army was invincible. It was not invincible. So there's not a lot known by that. And but we were, as I said, we ended up losing, the casualties were very high, and as I said, out of my platoon, we lost, there were only 13 out of about 40, there were 40 in a platoon. There were 13 out of 40 that came out without being wounded or killed. So we went to Luxembourg, the whole division did, for a rest and getting replacements. Mm-hmm. And that was where we were when the Battle of the Bulge started. And we were right there on the German border. And we got south, we were just barely south of the brunt of where the German army came through, but we were surrounded the first day. Mm. So anyway, that's...
What was the stalag you were put into?
Well, the first one was 2A, that's Roman numeral 2. Generally, that's the way they always go, right, 2A. And that was, it's in here, Neubrandenburg, N-E-U, and the second word is Brandenburg, B-R-A-N-D-E-R-B-U-R-G, or I'm not sure,
I'll get it out.
B-U-R-G or B-E-R-G. One of them means mountain, and one of them means another thing. And we were there just a couple of weeks. They had transported us. Eventually, when we got to a place where they could put us on a rail system, get us up north of Berlin. That's where North Brandenburg was. We were close to the Baltic Ocean, Baltic Sea. And we were there a couple of weeks, and for some reason they moved us down south of Berlin to Mühlberg on the Elbe River. That's M-U-H-L-B-E-R-G on the Elbe River. Elbe, E-O-B-E. I guess if you're German, you're going to say Elbe. But that's where I was when I was repatriated, or when the Russians liberated us. Mm-hmm.
What stalag number on that one?
That was 4B, Roman numeral 4B. And that was a huge, they had thousands of POWs there.
All Americans or
no?
Mixed?
A lot of British, the British forces, Canadians, and New Zealanders, and even one guy who I was had an Indian. And his name, they called him Ollie, that's all I know. Hmm. But a lot of Americans finally, and they had Russians, and they separated the Russians from us. Thank goodness. We were scoundrels, but they had us beat by a mile. And they also had some Danes in that, and they were separate unto themselves too, because they were not prisoners, they were detainees, so to speak, because Denmark was not at war with Germany. And they received Danish food parcels, which we envied because they had a lot of good food now. We didn't get anything like that.
You didn't get your Red Cross parcels?
We did some, but it was not enough. So anyway, that was 4B, where we were liberated by, and that was on the Elbe River. Incidentally, that was just, I would say, 15 or 20 miles from where the Americans and the Russians met.
Mm-hmm.
And which was at Torgau, I think.
Right.
And so we were just a few miles from Torgau. And the Russians moved us from that camp and moved us into Mühlberg, the town itself, and put us in some barracks, so to speak. I think they were nice brick buildings and about 3 stories high, and they had been cleaned out, no furniture or anything, and it looked like classrooms or something like that. It might have been a school,
Mm-hmm.
and it could have been a training camp or something, and they did have a parade route around it. These brick buildings were kind of formed a parade thing, and they had a fence around it, but it was a type of a wrought iron picket fence with maybe 6 foot high pickets, and they had a gate, and they didn't want us to leave.
Well, where would you go if you left?
Well, yeah, right. Well, that's part of the story is after being there a week, maybe or less than a week, we did get a little better food, but it wasn't much better than the Germans had given us. And but after about, I would say, a week, maybe not even that long, the war had come to an end, and an American, I believe he was a captain, and a couple of his underlings came into the camp. They were allowed into that was in the Russian zone on the east side of the Elbe River. And he gathered us, all the Americans together, and he said, fellas, we're trying to get trucks in here, bring you out, but they won't let us do it. He says, it's got to go through Moscow. It's got to go through Moscow. So he said, but I'll tell you what, if you guys if you can get out of here and go down the road a few miles, it's to the Elbe River, I'll guarantee to have trucks on the other side. There was a pontoon bridge crossing the Elbe River. So George Circle, and that was my buddy, and a medic from Chicago, the Chicago area, and his name was Bob. I got it in here. Okay. But he was a medic, and the 3 of us had looked around the camp, and we found this place back of an outbuilding, sort of, that the picket has been broken or something, and you could get through there. So we waited till dark, and we squeezed through there, took off on the road. And we, basically what happened is we walked as far as we could, and it was dark, probably till 10 or 11 at night, and we saw a light on in a kind of like a farmhouse out in the country. Went up to the door and knocked, and a couple of women came to the door, and they saw George, and he had grown up. He was Serbian origin, and he had a big black curly mustache by then. And they looked and said, Italiener? They thought we were Italian when they saw him. And I said, I'm German, I could speak German. So I said, nein, wir sind Amerikaner. I said, wir sind Krieggefangen. Just... Mm-hmm. And I asked them if we could stay there during that night. And they said, yes, but you're going to have to go upstairs. And so we went up there. Thankfully, there's nothing up there. It was just bare. So there were some kids in there, too. Next morning, we got up, and they had made eggs, fried some eggs for us, and I'm not sure what else. Maybe we had some bread, not toast, and gave them to us and sent us on our way. I thanked them. I wish I had got some names and addresses. I never did. And sure enough, by noon, we got to the Elbe River, and there the GI trucks, those 4x4s across the, and we crossed the bridge. It's a funny thing, once we got out of that camp, nobody bothered us. And there were refugees and German soldiers walking every different direction, going, trying to get home. And so anyway, we got across the river and got on the trucks, and they hauled us to Halle, Germany, which wasn't too far from there. I mean, it would have been an awful long walk. It might have taken a couple of days to get there, but yeah, we were there in a short order, and that was a big German airfield, had been, because they had some planes there, and I noticed that was the first time I ever saw a piggyback plane where they had like a medium bomber with a pursuit plane on top, on stilts.
Is that one of those rocket-powered experimentals?
I don't know about that. We saw some of those when we were in prison camp, but they dodged our planes because they stayed down on the deck. But what they did is they took those planes with them on long journeys because they were fighter planes and couldn't carry the fuel, and they released them then for protection when they needed them. But they weren't using them. We were just at that airfield.
Yeah.
So that's what the Americans were in charge of that, and that's why we sort of got physicals, if you want to put it that way. We got clean clothes, showers, and food, and they let us go through the chow line, and they warned us, now don't try to overeat. But you did, you just couldn't help it. And I know that first time we had that GI bread, tasted like cake. So from then on, they flew us from Halle, Germany, to the Cherbourg Peninsula again, to Camp Lucky Strike. They had a system of camps that were named after cigarettes, and I went to Camp Lucky Strike. And from there, we stayed there maybe 2 weeks in pyramidal tents, and they fed us. And the Army never did this to us, but they did there. They'd come around in the afternoon and say, you guys want some ice cream? They were trying to fatten us up, and they did. By the time I got home, I was bloated. So anyway, we were there at this camp, Lucky Strike, for a couple of weeks too, and we came back by a Liberty ship called the SS William Few, which is in here too, and landed at Norfolk, Virginia. Newport News, Newport News. I guess that's part of Norfolk. Yeah. And they told us we were going to go into New York and we'd see the Statue of Liberty, but we weren't. About a day out, they said, well, they told us we got to go to Norfolk. So that's why we landed. I didn't get to see it going out either. We left at night. In New York City on the Queen Elizabeth.
Fast trip.
Yeah, 4.5 days to Scotland. And the funny thing about that was, and I think I might have mentioned it in here, is that George and some of our other buddies, we had gotten a pass when we were at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, before we shipped out, went to New York City, and one of the places we went was the top of the Empire State Building. And we looked down and saw these docks and all these ships there and all that sort of thing. And there was a naval officer there, and we looked and we said, man, look at that big ship there. It'd be nice if we had something like that to go over on. He said, yeah, he got a Navy. That's the Queen Elizabeth. So when we finally embarked on that thing, it was nighttime. And they drove you up on the dock, and all you could see was a wall. There was a ship there, but you couldn't see the superstructure or anything, and you couldn't even see the water. They marched us on that thing. We said, well, where are we? And by golly, there was a big plaque. We came through like a lobby, big lobby. And there's a plaque. We looked, and it's the Queen Elizabeth. So that's how we went over. They let us, or we took off that night. It was at night because we didn't get to see the Statue of Liberty, or we didn't see New York City either. And we were escorted by probably some destroyers for a little while, and the first day we were escorted by blimps. They took us out for a day, and then they said, well, this thing goes so fast and we zigzag, there's no sub going to catch us. Until we got to south, just between the southern part of Ireland and England, going up that Irish Channel, and then we were met by a destroyer that took us on up to Glasgow. So that's how we got over that part. From there, we stayed. We didn't stay in Glasgow, but that was our first experience meeting foreigners and trying to do something, not knowing what the change was. We just hold our hand out here with us to take what you need. And they were awfully nice people. We got on a train and went down to close to Liverpool. It was called Boddington Park. I can't remember. It's in here too. And from there, we stayed there a week or so. And from there, we went to Southampton by train and loaded onto a small Belgium ship and crossed the English Channel that night.
And what month was this? What month was this?
This was in let me see. I've got it in here.
It's after D-Day, though.
Oh yeah. We landed at Omaha Beach, but it was about 3 months after D-Day.
So we're looking the fall of 44.
Yeah, and it was, I'll tell you, going across the channel, and I didn't know it, but I was seasick. Oh, it was rough. It was a little Belgian ship, and anyway, I got seasick, and I probably did a dumb thing. The Belgian fed us some kind of greasy food. That's what I blame it on. I vomited and everything, and I went out on that deck, and I laid up on against the bulkhead as far as I could from the railing, and that thing was tossing. It's a wonder I didn't go overboard. I was just so sick I couldn't. I said, I don't care what happens to me. But anyway, next morning we were we had to climb down cargo nets to get out little ducks, or I don't know what you call those. You have some of those landing boats. Yeah, and they took us into. They had some docks already set up there at Omaha Beach, and so we got there. And from there, we went to a camp close by and stayed there until they came for us in trucks. Went through Paris and on up to Belgium, and that's where we then got assigned to Hurtgen Forest, to the 28th Division. And so that's how I got there.
So tell me about all of your adventures after you got to the Hurtgen Forest.
Well, I got some of them in here, but the first night, and that's in here too, the first night we get up in a combat area, and well, understand we're in the infantry, and there's nobody in front of us but Germans and the Maginot, the Siegfried Line. And so I don't know who did it, but this one guy, come here, you two, George and me, you're going to be our outpost for the night. First night, bad luck. So they sent us out there, and they said, they had a shallow foxhole with a parapet around it that had been prepared, and they had a phone there with just wire strung along the ground. Said, you stay here till dawn, and well, just, supposed to let them know if anything happened. Well, the Germans aren't going to do anything at night, neither did the Americans. But there we're sitting on the back edge of that parapet with our feet inside, and all of a sudden, wham, wham, a terrible bombardment, about 2 in the morning. Well, you can imagine, we had the food come out of us. We picked up the phone, and it was dead. Oh boy, what do we do? We didn't know what to do. So next morning, early in the morning, when it barely got light, the sergeant came up, crawling up there, and he says, "Hey, you guys, come back." So we started back, and he'd already checked. He says, what happened is, he says, at artillery barrage, he says, that cut the phone line. So he'd been carrying it all the way to find out why it wasn't working. So we got back there. And I'll tell you, that that was my first under fire, getting the bombardment. No small arms fire, because, you know, it was all, and it was done for a purpose. It was done for, the Germans wanted to keep us awake so that we would be battle weary, or whatever you want to call it, or just tired. And we did the same thing to them. No small arms fire. It was all like mortars and smaller artillery, I imagine. And the Germans were using a super sensitive fuse in their shells, and those things could just get a little branch or a leaf, maybe. I'm not sure if they're that sensitive, and they'd explode in those trees at Hurricane Forest. And of course, shrapnel rained down. That was why there were so many casualties. And anyway, we stayed in there a few days, and we were occupying some trench, what do you call it, fortifications that the previous division had already been in, and who knows how many other divisions had used them. They were dug into the ground, about 3 feet deep, and parapets around them, and they had cut logs from all those trees, and when the artillery knocked them down, they had plenty of lumber, and then piled dirt and limbs on top of those, and raincoats to make them sort of waterproof, and then they had a hole in where you could crawl in, and the vision saw it. So we were fairly warm there, and we were well protected. Well, we tried a couple of times to get out. During the daytime, we'd get out and walk around in the rear part of it, because you couldn't see those pillboxes and things from where we were. But we stayed in those holes quite a bit, because I mean, that was protection that you needed. The thing about that was, though, that we were fed decently, which was really surprising. We got hot food twice a day, many a time, there at Hurricane Forest, by having the Jeeps driving up and bringing those jerry cans, thermos, you know, the insulated cans and stuff, bringing those up, and we had to go back and then send 2 guys back for a platoon or a squad, I can't remember. You carry them up and open it up, and they had all these cans, a stack of different cans with different food in them, and the whole squad would come around and bring their mess kits and have hot food. I'll tell you, they fed us pretty well. Sometimes we couldn't do it, but they didn't have that much with it. But I think we had at least 1 hot meal a day while we were there. And we spent a lot of time in those holes. We tried a couple of mornings to move forward in the forest, and every time we did, artillery started raining down. And one morning, then this is where I said, no rank, that's what I meant when I said this, no, little rank isn't worth anything. Anyway, the lieutenant said, Spomer, whatever, I don't know what he called me, he knew me by then. He said, I want you to take this pole charge, and you go up there to that pillbox, put it on the back door. We're going to give you covering fire so you can make it. You knew what I thought. I said, that's my death warrant. And don't think, I was scared. I said, you know, but I was going to do it. And this, to me, this day, I don't understand. Would I really have done it? I was ready to do it. And I think you're so numb, you just, and it's part of what you were trained to do, that I was going to do it. And anyway, this pole charge, I don't know if you're familiar with those things, but I had described it in here, I think, at the ending of
The
it.
Bangalore torpedo?
No, the Bangalore was different.
Yeah.
This was just I would say it was on a pole about 8 or 10 feet long, wooden pole, and it had an explosive on the end of it. You lay that up there, and then you pull that and get the fuse going and beat it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they gave us such a big artillery barrage that morning, I didn't get to do it. So that was where I think I lucked out.
You bet.
I think that I'd have never made it, I'm sure. But again, why did they pick me? But I think it was because I was a PFC, and they figured I might do it.
You're getting all that big money.
Yes. What was it? I can't remember. $56, 60. I can't remember. When I was a corporal, I know I got $66. But anyway, that was the only real combat I got into at Hurtgen Forest. And, well, as I said, we got so many wounded people killed that they finally took us out too. And there are, I think, 7 different divisions were in Hurtgen Forest. And you don't hear much about it, except the guys over there know about it. Well, there's another story about that. When I got up there, and I think I talked about that in the addendum, this was a deal where I got to England, and of course we went overseas without weapons or anything. And when we got to England, they at that camp at Doddington Park, they issued us weapons, and they were cosmolined, and they called them D-Day specials. What it is they were rifles, Grand M1 rifles that the guys that had invaded the beach on D-Day, the ones that got killed, they picked them up, the rifles, cosmolined them and sent them back for reuse. And we had those big drums of some kind of solvent, which was probably an oily gasoline type, and they were heated, and you would take the wooden stuff off of the stock and the handpiece of the rifle, and of course it'd be the sling too. You'd dip all that stuff in that cosmoline and get that liquid to get rid of the cosmoline. It dissolved it, and then you wiped it down. And then we had to go to the firing range and zero in your rifle. And I got there, and my rifle, this was, they're supposed to be semi-automatic. In other words, you get 8 rounds in the clip, and you can fill each time you're going to get a shot and a shell go. Well, mine wouldn't do that. Mine would go once, and I'd have to pull the lever back, hand cock it. And I told that sergeant in charge of that, I said, hey, something wrong with this thing. Oh, he says, it's just dirty go-kart. They can run it through the cosmoline, or the cleaning again. So I did that. Still worked, He looked at it, and he couldn't see anything. Something happened, though. That rifle was damaged. So anyway, he wouldn't do anything about it. And I went overseas. I went to Hurtgen Forest with him. And well, as we were going into Hurtgen Forest, after we got off of the trucks, they were bringing some wounded guys back, and there was one on a stretcher. And he was lucid. He could, I could speak with him and that. And he had his rifle laying next to him I said, hey, buddy. I said, can I switch your rifle? I got one that doesn't work. He says, yeah, go take it. I doubt if I'll get back. So I took it. And I also had a pickaxe entrenching tool, And an infantryman didn't like a pickaxe. He wanted the shovel. He wanted to dig. And so I asked him about that. And he said, yeah, he switched. So I gave him my pickaxe, and I took his shovel. And it was one of those that they had developed from earlier in the war, that you could unscrew a bolt that made the head of that shovel rigid to the handle, and then turn it like, and you could use it like that, and so you know what they are. So anyway, that's kind. I wanted one of those, and I got it, but I had to do it on my own. So anyhow, that's how they were rather casual about some of that stuff. Maybe he felt, he's not going to be in there long anyway.
Right. Well, he was hoping he wasn't going to come back.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I think we are ready for the Battle of the Bulge, and that's Hurtgen Force. Really, there was nothing momentous about it except I feel those artillery barrages and them wanting me to be the sacrificial lamb or something doing that. But and I'll have to admit it, I was scared to death. Here I am, 84 years old, and I made it. Yes, but then I was only. That was another funny thing. I was in ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program. I was supposed to go to college. I was supposed to go to engineering school. And during the last month of basic training at Fort Benning, they gave us infantry basic training at Fort Benning. I got good training, but they knew what they were going to do. And the reason. This is before any of my military experiences, but the reason they did that is that ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program, is the Air Force had the Air Cadet program. They were getting 18-year-olds right out of high school. The Army got a lot of ASTPers. The Navy was getting the V-12, had the V-12 program, and they were all, and I think, I know that the Air Force, their Air Cadet program stopped the same time the ASTP did, because George Circle was an Air Cadet, and we ended up at Camp Livingston, Louisiana together, and that's how I met him. And the odd thing was, and I still remember, every place we went, we were in alphabetical order, and it was Circo, Spital, and Spomer. Every place. Now, I don't know whatever happened to Spital, S-P-I-T-A-L-L, I think is how you spell it. We lost him somewhere, but George and I stayed together. So that's how I ended up in the infantry, and that's how George ended up in the infantry too. He was an Air Cadet.
Best laid plans don't work.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, that's what's so sad, that there were a lot of 19-year-olds that their lives were taken away. And imagine what might have happened if they had, well, we don't know. Well, okay, now. Okay, we're getting out of the Hurtgen Forest. I don't think, I will say this, that there was a lot of snow and mud, even in that forest. But we had to, of course, we had to go along trails and little dirt roads, and if that wasn't a mess. But we did have overshoes, our overcoats. We were dressed more. I don't really remember how we got to Luxembourg, but I presume it was by truck, and you just don't remember things like that. You were awfully glad you got out of there, though. Mm-hmm. In fact, this one officer, lieutenant, who wrote this book, the title of his book was The Green Hell of Hurtgen Forest, and that's really what it was. I probably got some pictures, not that I took, but I've seen pictures, and I say, that looks just like Hurtgen Forest or the Battle of the Bulge. It's nothing but snow and mud. And supposedly one of the coldest winters they had at that time, you know. I mean, for over a period of time. Just like maybe we had a couple of weeks over here. Oh, I could say this. While in Hurtgen Forest, I know that's when it all started. In order to keep from getting trench foot and our feet freezing, we took off our socks, our shoes and socks, and we had an extra pair of socks. And how we got them dry was we'd take the wet ones and put them between our long johns and up to next to our skin, and let them there overnight, over to the next day, and they'd be dry, and then we'd put them on. And we didn't wash them.
Find your boots froze stiff?
No, really, those overshoes had a lot to do with it. You know, they were those old felt type overshoes. They weren't all rubber or anything. And eventually the Germans took all that stuff away from us. They took our overshoes, because I think they were giving them to their own people. And our overcoats left. Of course, they took our helmets away, and we had those knit caps under there. What else? I don't know. Oh, it took our gloves, too. That's right. So, yeah, then we went to Luxembourg. That was a rest area. It was a static front. You got that going?
I got it going. We're okay.
It was a static front, and that's why they used it for kind of a rest area and a resupply type thing, personnel supply replacements, to get replacements. And I was an acting squad leader, so to speak, for a while. Didn't even know it. And they finally, when we got to Hurtgen Forest, then that lieutenant told me, he says, here's some men for you to make up for the ones you'd lost. And they distributed them around. And these guys were all 35 years older, so some of them, I think, were criminals. I'm not kidding. Some of them were pretty wild. And here I am, a 19-year-old, and I had to act like a father to some of them. But I did the best I could, you know, and we had to go through training exercises with them where we could find the time and the place in fields and such as that there in Luxembourg. And we did a minimum amount of that stuff just to make sure that they knew what we were going to do. So we lived there in houses, generally in the villages, in the small towns. People had already, for the most part, had gone away, had been forced out or whatever. So we stayed in pretty good housing there. And again, there we got good food, especially. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of, because they could drive the jeeps right into your area there, because that was a static front. The Germans weren't bothering, and we weren't bothering them except for patrols. Just observation patrols. And we were at, in fact, those are some rather enjoyable times in a way, because the one village we were in, Nachmanderscheid, which was, we stayed there a fair amount of time. By that I don't mean months, but I could say a week or two maybe. We were there at Thanksgiving, and our Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And we were told that they're going to have turkey and all the trimmings on Thanksgiving Day for you guys. So we found out about that, and we talked to the villagers. We said, wouldn't it be nice if we could get our platoon and we'd clean out this barn, and we'd get the villagers and bring them in and have them share food with us. And they wanted to bring stuff too, so it ended up, we got that barn cleaned out, planks and whatnot for tables, and we had a nice Thanksgiving dinner. They brought bread, homemade bread, and what you call tarts type, which were, I'm going to say, fruit So we had that was real pleasant. We had a few, this is something I didn't write down about. Some of the more, what should I say, I don't mean athletic type, but some of the older men who were still physically pretty good shape, and most of those guys were, even
The Belgians.
the Luxembourgers.
Yeah, the Luxembourg.
And the Free French they were part of the Free French movement, where they were doing spying and that, passing on the information to the Americans, and maybe the other way too. But this one guy would go out on patrols with us, and we had to go on patrols. A platoon had 3 squads, you probably know. And every third day we went on patrol. Well, on patrol, and we were at this one place at Nachmanderscheid, and we would walk a couple miles to the hill overlooking the Our River, I think was the name of it. O-U-R River, between Belgium or between Germany and Luxembourg. And I think it ran across the Belgian border too, or along the Belgian border. And one squad would go out, and we'd spend some time there looking, watching, seeing what we could see. Sometimes you'd see nothing. Once or twice we did see a guy come over the hill carrying something, a German, way off in the distance. Well, it said it was an observation patrol, so we didn't shoot at him. I mean, what the heck's an M1 rifle going to do? We had a BAR too with this, but that's no better than the M1 for distance. And we'd come back and report, and I think they were doing this all up and down the line. And this is another thing that at that time I couldn't understand it. I said, if they were smart, they were sending these patrols out all along that line. Why didn't they triangulate, knowing where these people were going underground into the, they had camouflage. They had trucks and tanks camouflage on the other side. Now that was quite a distance away without a forest across that river valley. And I'm sure the other people were reporting the same things we did, along the line.
You were reporting the vehicles?
Yeah. Well, no, we didn't see it.
No, okay.
We would just say, we saw this guy, and if the other guy 5 miles, and when we were spread real far apart, say 2 or 3 miles away, or 5 miles, you can triangulate and say, there's something going on there, because they both saw this man at 10:15 or whatever. And they didn't do anything like that. I mean, I was smart enough. I had geometry. There's a lot that could be done, but I didn't have a big gun. And anyway, one day we were going along on that. It was more than a road. It was a path there, more than a path. It was a sort of little road that we took up there. We got up nearly to the brow of that hill, where it's overlooking the valley, and there was a farmhouse on a little side road that went up there. And I think this was the first time we came up there. And I said, hey, we don't want to get too far back here without finding out what's in that house. So George and I told the other guys to stay there with the BAR. And George and I went up into the house, and we found nothing. It was, again, ransacked. There was nothing damaged. But they tended to build their houses like this and a barn right onto it.
Right angles.
Yeah. And, well, we came out of that house, and they said, hey, we better look in this barn. Well, it was closed, big doors. So, says, well, what are we going to do? We've got to open that door. So, I said, and I've got that written down in this thing here, the last thing I put in. And I don't know who did what, but one of us flung that door open while the other was standing there. And boy, did we get a surprise. There were a bunch of chickens in there. You know what chickens do when they're scared.
How many did you shoot?
Well, that was what I said. said, I know some of those guys were criminals. I saw them take those chickens and they just wrung their neck. And they were wild. So, and I know this was, I didn't write this down, but some of these things come back, and you'll get the first one on this one, but I don't know which town it was in. I don't think it was that town, Nachmanderscheid. But since I was a squad leader, I just wanted to go around that little town, little village, and the outskirts, and see that, you know, there was anything that else we should be doing or looking at. And I started walking on, there's a path down there, and here comes a guy, a local citizen with some goats or sheep, I'm not sure, and he had a dog. And that dog bared his teeth at me, and if you know, my hair stood on end. And I just took my rifle. I was going to let him have it if he didn't, and he called the dog off. But, oh, I tell you, that was, I said, no dog's going to take me. Big dog? Yeah, he was a pretty big dog. He wasn't as big as he was like a sheepdog, you know. But boy, when I saw those old white teeth. So that's the kind of thing you ran into. And we also ran into another one, which I didn't put in yet. I was thinking about this because my daughter keeps mentioning it. She says, but Dad, you told us about, well, there's a couple of those instances when we were in Luxembourg. And one night, we had to have an outpost every night. I mean, you're not just going to sit in those villages without having somebody around to watch things outside. So anyway, we had a field phone, and anyway, this guy that was on guard duty, he called in. I was in nice where it was warm, and well, all of us were, except for him. And he called in. He says, "Hey, there's somebody up in this church bell tower." And I said, "Really?" "Yeah." So I said, "Well, I'll come on out." So I said, "Where are you?" And he told me. And I put my boots on and got dressed, went out. Sneaked around. I met him behind a building. And I said, "Where is that now?" And he said, and I looked and I said, boy, that looks strange. It looks like the body of a man standing there, you know. And watched him, and it looked like we could see him move. This was bright moonlit night. And then all of a sudden I looked, I said, you know what? That's that bell hanging there. He agreed, but we had to go up there and look. Yeah, well, that's what it was. And similarly, for some reason my squad had to go somewhere, and we couldn't get back before dark. And we had to walk along a trail on fairly high ground, which you don't like to do. But the trail was broken already, and so we were walking along there, and there was a long sloping meadow thing and down into maybe some trees way out there. That was probably a good half a mile or so. But we walk along, and somebody says, "Hey, there's some Germans down there." So I just went like that. We all hit the ground and looked, and you look, and you see guys, Germans in overcoats, and they're moving a little bit. But it isn't that. It's Christmas tree, little pine trees, little in that snow with bright sunlight or moonlight. Those are the kind of things you can see stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I haven't written about that yet, but I'm going to. That is one thing. So that happened in Luxembourg. What else? We did get to, once we were in a bigger town, and I don't know the name of it for sure, but it was like Niederfoylen or Foylen maybe. I don't know the name of that town. It was not just a village. It was a little, maybe, it wasn't as big as Tuscola, but might have been But we did get in something like that once. Oh, I do. And while in Luxembourg, this is in here. I've written about that, and it is about to do about George Circle being the star of that one. I think it was here, a send-off to Paris on page 3 of the addendum. And I'll just go through that real quickly. But we were in this village, and we had to put booby traps around the village, at least on the incoming places. And so who got the job of doing that? Well, it was George Circle and Spomer. And the booby traps I got there, it shows how they were done on page 4. They were hand grenades that you left in their canisters, and you nailed the canister to a stake that was maybe sticking out of the ground, and pulled a pin on put a tripwire between the two, and pull them out of the canister, but don't let the handle come out, and just fire the pin. And you had to do that 2 guys simultaneously. Well, I trusted George, and he trusted me. So we did that across that road. And that night, George and a couple other guys were going to be guard duty, and they went out there early, and we pulled the pins and had the things armed, the booby trap armed, and they went out maybe another 100 yards or better, and they had a hole there that they kind of stayed in for a couple hours. So I got a call on the telephone and said, hey, one of your guys can go to Paris, but if he goes, he's got to be ready by 6:30 because there's a Jeep coming by here to pick him up. So I said, well, I'm going to let George go if he wants to go. So I called out there, and George, you want to go to Paris? And yeah, he said, oh yeah, I'll go. So I said, well, you better come in because you got to get your gear together, and because they'll pick you up at 6:30. Well, a few minutes later, we hear pow, pow. And I knew immediately what happened. And George did too, thank goodness. And we went out there, and he came walking toward us, and I said, oh, thank God he didn't get hurt. And he didn't, but he heard those firing pins, and the thing snapped when the thing flew over, and he hit the ground, and that stuff all flew over him, apparently. So I had to write that one in there. That was dumb.
Oh, yeah. Especially since he put it there.
He forgot about it, and I did too. So that was kind of in Luxembourg. It was rather peaceful there, and we kind of liked it. But when the bulge started, and I think I got that pretty well described in here originally, that we were in another, and we frequently moved around. Sometimes didn't stay in one place even a day, maybe a day at the most. And this was another little village, very little. It only had about 3 houses in it. When the ball started on the 16th of December, 1944, we were in a house that night, and at about 5 in the morning, we had a terrific artillery barrage come in, and of course we put our boots and everything on. We didn't sweep in our underwear or anything, but we took off your boots and whatever you could, and we got dressed, and I had to run down to that house where that lieutenant was staying. Matt, I don't even know his last name now. Matt, that's all I can tell you. Matt was his first name. I suppose his name was Matthew. And I went down there, and he said, yeah, he said the company commander called him, said he wants everybody together, get together, and he said, meet us up here at such and such a time. Well, this is something I didn't write about, and I probably should now, come to think of it. But as I got up there, some shells were falling around, and when I heard the boom, boom, I dove. And you know, I was in that courtyard of that house where he was staying, and you know what they have in the courtyard?
Mm-hmm.
And it was raining and everything. And I got all crapped up. But anyway, that was the first day. That was when it started, and we got with the company, and we stayed together as a company, and we scouted around. We got in a couple of firefights, and we broke away. And I know at one of those firefights we had, we were in a hedgerow, and a German comes with his hands up out from the woods, and I spoke German. I speak German, and so I could speak to him, and I told him to keep his hands up and drop his weapon, which he didn't have it really at that time, and to come up. So he did, and he told me that his buddy, they were artillery observers, and his buddy had been wounded, and he was trying to find a place where he could help his buddy get to for some help. But I didn't tell her, hey, we're on the move, we don't know what we're going to be. Well, I wasn't about to shoot him, and George thought I was getting ready to shoot him because I was talking pretty rough to him, apparently. Because I remember George said, don't shoot him, don't shoot him, don't shoot him. But you know, who knows what other guys might have done. So, anyway, that was one thing I do remember. And I have that talked about here.
What happened to him?
He went down, got his buddy. He had him leaning on him, and he got a wound in his upper leg or something, and he couldn't really walk very well. But we didn't offer any help. So I sent him to the rear, whatever that was, because we were surrounded. So you know what happened. And that's the story I got in here, which I think I headlined, what goes around comes around. And so I don't know what happened to him after that. We got in a few firefights like that, and generally as a company we got away. And I don't think if we had casualties, I even knew about them. But it ended up after the second day, the captain, word came down, they said, hey, we're surrounded, we can't get out of here as a company. Said, break up into groups of 4 or 5 and try to work their way west. So that's what we did. And of course George and I were together, along with, there was a corporal from our company, and I don't know who there was another guy, I don't remember who that was. And we walked around that rest of that day. It was at night, we were told that, and then the rest of that day, we started working our way west, and we avoided Germans. We could see some, and we could hide. But one day we were going around the brow of the hill, because we had seen some Germans over farther to our right, and we were walking around that, and then all of a sudden, we get some small arms fire coming over our heads. And there was some Germans out there, armored column. So we'd already used up all our ammunition, had no food, no ammunition. So the corporal, he just said, hey, we got to give up. So he took off his stuff, laid it there behind, we were behind kind of a haystack thing. So we did the same, and we just walked down with our hands up, and boy, I'll bet they had 200 Americans there already on the line. And they frisked us. They didn't frisk us. We had to empty our pockets. They took anything like knives, you had, I don't know why you want to carry loose rounds of ammunition, but I didn't want that. And I had a wrist compass on this wrist, and I had a wristwatch. But when I saw I was getting captured, I took my wristwatch and I put it on my dog tag chain and let it hang down. The compass I just let go, but I didn't want to lose a wristwatch. So they didn't see that until they told us to pick our stuff up. And when I reached down, I'm right-handed, to pick up my stuff, the compass came out. Boy, they snagged onto that in a hurry. And they fed us that night. They were a bunch of, I don't know whether they were SS troops or what. I don't know. They were tankers, I believe, and they had that.
You'd just given up. And we think to the SS because they had that double S lightning bolt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it was SS or not. I can't tell you. They were awfully arrogant and cocky, I'll say that.
That's a culture thing.
Yeah, they fed us better than we were fed, I think, all the while I was in prison camp. They had a stew which had potatoes and, I'm going to say, carrots and who knows, peas in it, and meat. Might have been horse meat, I don't know. I know I ate horse meat in prison camp. But whatever it was good food, but they didn't keep us that long. But they had, I would say 200 people there on a long column. And they started marching us, and as we went along, they kept at it. And by the time we were by the time we got into Germany, we had a lot of people in there. Most of them were Americans. And the thing about that was, you probably know this already because you've talked to so many people and you've read so much, that the Air Force couldn't come out really to do anything because of the fog and the bad weather. But when the weather changed and we'd see these hundreds of planes coming across, and they were, most of them American because they bombed and did their work in the daytime. The British did it at night. And we would, when they had aircraft, might shoot some down, might have some fighter planes, but there weren't a whole lot of fighter planes, but there were some. And we'd see that planes go down, and that was an awful sight. We always looked and count how many parachutes do we see. And you can see those old white parachutes coming down, and lo and behold, in a little while, you probably had some of those guys in with you. But it was sure good to, we got strafed by our own planes. And we got, I don't know where this was, and I might have met it now. It's so, I don't have a real good recollection of where it was and how it happened, but just before we got on those boxcars, those little 40 and 8s, they were still using those 40 and 8s. After we got on those at, I believe it was at Limburg or Gerolstein in Germany, after we walked that far from Luxembourg through, across the Rhine River into Germany. And the British bombed that town that night. And we were not in the midst of it exactly, but some of that stuff came pretty close, and it did damage the one big, it was like a big factory building, a brick building. It damaged one end of it. And so I know we had a problem there. Then I think the next day we got on those 40 and 8s and left. But they didn't strafe that train. And I don't know whether they had red crosses on top marked on them or not. But they didn't strafe that train. I did see them in prison camp strafe the train that was close to our camp. P-51s coming down there. and pretty soon it boom, boom, stuff and blows.
Oh, just a regular freight train.
Yeah.
So what was it like when you got to your first camp?
Well, it really wasn't all that bad. We got, as I said, we got on the train at either Gerolstein or Limburg, and I think don't know for sure, and I may not really have had it accurately here. I've got what I call a military itinerary. Where is that? I kept, you may not know this, but I probably got it handy. I've got a New Testament and an address book. I kept a lot of notes in it. You would be surprised what you can get those things on the margins. And that's, wait a minute. That bothered me a little bit. I don't know for sure on Gerolstein or, well, I don't even know now. Okay. All right. To Limburg, I put here, but Gerolstein still reminds me. This is on page 10 of the addendum. I didn't know what to do. I said, I want to keep this together, so I marked this as an addendum. There's an appendix and an addendum, and I don't know what I'm going to do for more.
Well, before we're done, we'll have this all rolled into one.
Yeah.
First person, then we'll tinker with it.
Top of page 10, December 18th, January 2nd. Marched into Germany under guard through Troy, Virgis, Prim, that should be an umlaut U, Prim, Gerolstein, Mayen, Koblenz, Bonhams, and to Limburg. Okay, I may have Gerolstein in the wrong place. But to Limburg I put where we were put on small European-style box chart. So, but that's where we went. Then went to North Brandenburg, north of Berlin, and stayed there 2 weeks. And that was a fairly nice camp, really. It was a smaller camp, and it was clean. And they had some food for us there that was, it wasn't what we were used to, but it was satisfactory for the condition we were in. Then they took us to, they got us on the trains again and took us down south of Berlin to Neubrandenburg, to Milburg on the Elbe River. And we went through Berlin, I'm sure, on one of those trips because there was a big city we did go through, but they didn't let us see any sights. So anyhow, that's where then. But at Milburg 4B, at Camp 4B, Stalag 4B, it was terrible. At first, where I was, where all the Americans were, we had rats running through the building. You could see at night. There was just enough light. You could see them running across on those rafters. And we had fleas. You were constantly. We did get some DDT one time, and I know you wouldn't do that anymore, but you douse yourself, get it in your underclothes, and you might have a few nights where you could sleep and not have to scratch and slap an itch. Mm-hmm. Then when this was when I was in the American part of that camp. We did have they had a living barracks, part of the barracks here, and a washroom with those big round things and water running constantly. And on the other end, you had another group. You had two groups using that. And that way they saved the plumbing for two. And on either end, you had a outhouse type privy, because at night, you didn't dare go out of the building. But in the daytime, you could go. They had some palaces for, 50-seaters. Oh, boy, big things. And they were built up. I imagine they couldn't dig the pits deep enough. Anyway, so you couldn't really shower. You could wash as best you could, but you had no change of clothes. But we did have long winter underwear and wool pants and wool shirts. They did take our pants away from us and gave us some, and I got some that were so little, they were high water and tight. I split the seat one time. I had to get sew them together. I got the British helped me out with that, and it was very bad. But we did have a little bit of discipline, except where I was with the Americans at first. There was not a whole lot of discipline. And the guys complained, and I shouldn't say this, but some of them acted as though the Germans owed us something. Some of them acted like that, no kidding. But then when I got sick, incidentally, I had diarrhea off and on. In Luxembourg, they took me to a whatever you call it, a field hospital maybe. It was a tent, big tents. And they had, I think I've got that written in here. And then after, when I was captured, I had diarrhea a good part of the time. And I found out later that I had the enteritis and a few other, some associated with diverticulosis probably. Let's see, where was I on that? Well, then that's what happened. I got a real bad case of diarrhea. And so they put me in the camp hospital, believe it or not. And they had one doctor, American doctor, and he couldn't do anything. He had no medicine, but they put me on a diet of, and I do have that mentioned in here, of like boiled potatoes and toast and tea, maybe toast and tea mainly. And I stayed there about a week or 10 days, and then they released me for light duty. Well, when they and they had guys in there that had gangrene. Oh, terrible. Some of those guys had their feet frozen, especially from the 106th Division. They were a brand new division that had come up there, and they had these mud-packed boots that weren't worth a turn for them. Anybody's feet probably would have frozen. They were rubber boots, and that's not the thing. I don't think you want to wear that.
Yeah.
But anyway, when I got out of the hospital, about a day later, the hut commander or somebody says, you're supposed to go out on commando. That was, you're going to leave the camp and go out and work detail somewhere. Well, I didn't. I said, man, if I have to walk very far in that, I am not going to make it. I can't do any work. And in fact, that's what it says in your light duty. Yeah, I had those little things saved, and I got them somewhere yet, but I got a copy of them in the appendix of this thing. But anyhow, what happened is, there was a British fella, a Canadian actually. He wanted to escape. He'd been a prisoner a number of years, and he wanted to try to escape. Oh, here it is. It's on page 28 of this thing back here. But it didn't copy too well, but these are the things that I got from the hospital, from Captain, can't remember his name, because I ran across his name someplace else. McKee. Yeah. He was given the Germans gave him a rough time, I found out later, because he was trying to get stuff for the Americans and he couldn't. Well, but anyway, I found out that this guy wanted to try to escape. Now, how he would do it is go out under my identity. So we changed identities. So I had to give him a dog tag, and he didn't ever give me one of his. But we exchanged prisoner of war dog tags. I got them here. I got mine back finally, and I sent him his. But he went out under my name, and I had to live in the barracks with the British. Well, that was one of the best things that could have happened to me, because they had been prisoners, some of them, 2-3 years, and they already had a good hierarchy going. The hut commander, he was a Scotsman, you didn't fool around with him. He was very fair. And I made a good friend there, and I've got George Gosling. He was here. He visited us here in Tuscola with his wife. He was from New Zealand, and New Zealander. His name was George Gosling. But when I got there, things were so much better. That's one of the things, and I think I mentioned it in here. One of the things that this hut commander did, Scotsman, well, in the morning he'd blow his whistle. He'd say, "Wakey, wakey, lads, wakey, wakey." We'd have to get up. Of course, we had roll call to meet, and the Germans would not go in until they tallied right, and you're standing out there stamping your feet in the cold. But he came up to me one day, and he said, he handed me a razor blade, double-edged razor blade. I really had never shaved. Didn't have to hardly.
Yeah, that's right.
But I guess I had some peach fuzz, and he says, "I want you to shave. Get that." I told him, I said, "Well, I don't have a razor." He says, "There's one. You have to borrow it." So it couldn't run. So I shaved dutifully, whether I needed it or not. And one time he came to me, and I had those, I don't know if you were familiar with those inside-out leather boots, those rough leather.
Combat boots?
Yeah. Well, those things were rough. You didn't have to polish them. He came up to me and handed me some black shoe polish and a brush and something. And he says, "Black your boots." He said, "Well, you can't do black your boots." And by the time I got done there, those boots shined. But they did have some discipline. And they got the BBC News, which is in here. I think I mentioned that. But the BBC News came. It was surreptitiously or secretly brought in and read in the various barracks which the British had. And they had people already assigned to be at the doors and windows to watch for anybody coming in, because what it was is the guy apparently had the folded up thing, and he had some kind of a belt that he would put that written news on that belt. And they come in, and if everything was okay, he'd take that out from under his belt and read the BBC News, so we knew what was going on. So how did they get that? They got a radio. Well, no kidding, yeah, what a word is. Yeah, we don't know. And I know they were suspicious of me because I could speak German. They probably thought I was going to be a ferret or something like that. But of course, I had no idea of doing that sort of thing. So, but I did. They took, and George, there's my other buddy, George Gosling. He was 40 years old by then. He had lied about his age to get in the RAF from New Zealand. And he kind of looked after me and showed me the ropes. And there's one thing, we had warm water, hot water to shave with. They had tapped into the electric lines and had made some heaters. You stick it in that water and heat up their water, They'd made dishware out of those cans of stuff. And those guys were excellent. They had knitted sweaters and socks. In the early days, they could get yarn from England and other places that their people knew they were POWs, and they'd send it to them. Some of them learned how to knit. It was a good deal here. But they supplied me with eating utensils, too, because we didn't have anything. Like I said, they had a good thing going there already. And they wanted spit and polish if possible, you know. They were dressed better than we were because I don't know how they got the better clothes, but somehow they did. And the strange thing is, when George and his wife were here one day, we were sitting in the living room there, and we had different chairs and some different furniture, but they were sitting over there by the window, he and his wife. And her name was Violet, and she didn't like it. So she wanted to be called Mac. So that's what we called her. She didn't like Violet. George, we were talking. I said, "Hey, George, I got to ask you something. I've often wondered where that radio was that you guys had from get the BBC News." He laughed. He said, "It was in our barracks, under the seat of that outhouse thing." And what it was is that outhouse was next to the hut commander's office, and they had mounted that under the seat, and this was a fixed seat, see, under there, and run a wire through there into his office. And he had some kind of a receiver, and he could sit there like this and write down the news. And I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" He says, "We didn't want to take any chances." So, they had a suspicion.
Did the Germans know you spoke their language?
I didn't let on at all until afterwards reading. Well, no, I did on that march, when they marched us into Germany. For a couple of days I had this young kid, he was probably 16 or 17 years old. He would walk beside me because he knew I spoke German. And he was a pretty good kid. He was younger than me. And I wish, there's again, I think, why didn't I get his name and address and try to find out what might have happened to him, give him mine too. He knew I could speak German because we were speaking. Of course, my German wasn't as good as his, and it still isn't, but it's understandable. And, with your hands. In fact, this is an interesting thing. It doesn't have anything to do with this. I'll tell you later.
Okay.
But I didn't want to let on. I was afraid to. In fact, when we got captured, they lined us up. When we got captured in Germany, wherever that was, or Luxembourg, I'm not sure. I think it was in Luxembourg, actually. We were lined up, and there were a couple of Germans standing out there, and a couple of them were officers, and one guy with a real official-looking officer-type uniform. He was looking at a list, and apparently it was a list of, we gave our name, rank, and serial number, just what we were told to do. And he looked at this list, and he says, Stein, Juden. That means Stein, the guy's name, there is a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
And they called him out. They asked for Stein. And I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know they were doing that to Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So, at that time. So, anyway, they called Stein out and talked to him, and then they sent him back in, didn't do anything. But,
were their dog tags marked Jewish and Christian and so on?
Well, no, our dog tags weren't. Let me show you what they are. Well,